Former Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, who took a bullet for President Reagan when he was shot back in 1981, is telling NewsNation his thoughts on Secret Service agents' response to the attempted assassination of President Trump and the overall security plan.
By all accounts, they responded quickly, effectively, shielded the president, covered the president, until I believe we heard on TV that the shooter was down. But what should have happened is we knew there was a high ground problem. That's why they had counter sniper. But they're going to have to explain at some point why it was not posted by a police officer, an agent, or someone else to ensure if it was locked and closed up or whatever it was.
We're going to talk more about all of this with presidential historian and author Lindsay Chervinsky. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So this is something for many Americans that hasn't happened in our lifetime. It hasn't happened in mine. It's been 43 years since the nation saw this kind of attempted assassination of a current or former president. So how significant will this past weekend's incident be in the course of history, do you think?
Well, it'll certainly be a turning point in history. As you said, it's been a while since we've experienced something like this, and we're grateful for that because there have been generations in the past that have experienced many of these traumatic moments, and it definitely does have a defining effect. How it's going to affect our current moment and politics, of course, is something that we're going to have to see how it plays out. But anytime we have an attack on our president, it absolutely remains central in the history books.
Yeah, well, the mudslinging in the political climate has just gotten unreal. You can't even hardly call it mudslinging. It's so much worse than that. Can you talk about how the climate was during President Reagan and during that time when he was shot versus how things are today, and what that could really mean for what comes out of Saturday's incident down the track?
Yeah, so I actually think that the early 1980s is a little bit of an aberration when we look at some of these moments of presidential assassination or really acute political violence. Typically, the mudslinging, like you've mentioned, is actually a central part of the political climate when political violence happens, because it's what starts that sense that violence is required in order to preserve someone's way of life or the world as they see it. Reagan's assassination was a little bit different because it seems like the man was genuinely just very ill himself. Whereas if we look at the assassinations in the 1960s, for example, or even those of Presidents Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, it represented a much more structural ill, that the political system was actually much more pervasively sick across the board.
Yeah, I want to take a look at some polling because we've heard comparisons, of course, of this year's election to that of 1968 when there were really fierce tensions. But now a Marist poll back in May found that 47% believe the country could have another civil war. So how concerned are you about the divisions in our country? And could this shooting actually somehow lower the temperature for a time at least?
I'm incredibly concerned about it. We certainly have been in a polarized place before, so I don't want to say that that is unprecedented. But the moments that I look at that are most similar, whether it's the 1890s or actually I would say the 1790s or the 1960s or even the 1850s, those are moments when there was a lot of political violence. And I don't think we are likely to see a civil war like the one that we read about in our books or we see on the movie screen. But that doesn't mean that it can't get very, very scary, and we should be on guard against that. There are two options, I think, that can kind of come out of this moment in terms of political rhetoric and how we respond. One is that we can use it as a unifying moment. It can be a check against some of those worst impulses and sober, perhaps, some of the more radical voices. Or it can start a cycle of, increasing intensity and retribution and vengeance. I obviously am hoping and I'm encouraging our leaders and those with a big platform to pursue the former.
Yeah, well, it's so nice to see Trump and Biden both calling for unity, and Trump even saying that he's ripped up portions of his script to change the tone and reflect, his new outlook, perhaps. Lindsay Chervinsky, a historian, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.